Thank you for joining me. I want to wish all my friends and family around the world a very happy preparation day today, a very happy Sabbath tomorrow, and for those of us here in the United States, a very happy 4th of July. Of course, I realize everybody has a 4th of July, but the 4th of July in the United States is a very special day for us as we are celebrating our 250th year of independence. And one of the great things that we're celebrating about our country is the freedom of religion, the freedom to follow our own conscience. And I'm very thankful that there are many other countries in the world that also allow their citizens to follow their own conscience, because that is so vitally important. As a matter of fact, it's what Romans chapter 14 is all about. The fact that everyone should be following their own conscience. Now, I want to point out there's a big difference between following your own conscience and just following your own personal preferences. We need to be honest with God, honest with the Holy Spirit, and follow the things the Holy Spirit has convicted us of, so that we are truly following our conscience guided by the Holy Spirit instead of just following our own personal preferences. But that being said, again, that is such an important thing. God does not force anyone. Love cannot be forced. And so that's why he's leading each one of us oftentimes on a different level. Not that one level's any better than the other level, but many times our journeys just simply are not the same. And God knows where each one of us are, and he is leading us and he's guiding us, and we need to follow him. And that's so important, because I've talked with people who have felt that they have a right to religious freedom because their way is right. But this person over here doesn't have a right to religious freedom because their way is wrong. Well, religious freedom for only the people who think the way we do is not religious freedom. That's not religious liberty. That's not allowing people to follow their own conscience. If I have religious liberty and I'm free to follow my own conscience, everyone else needs to be free to follow their own conscience as well. And again, that is what Romans 14 is all about. And there in verse 5, it says, "Let each one be persuaded in his own mind." Now, I've had people ask me, the Sabbath in Revelation 14, is that the weekly Sabbath or the feast Sabbaths? And I believe it is the feast Sabbaths. But the spirit of Romans 14 remains the same, whether it's a weekly Sabbath or a festival Sabbath. The same thing when he's talking about food. And some people ask, well, is that talking about eating clean or unclean meat, or just food sacrificed to idols? Well, when I consider everything in the New Testament that has been written on the subject, I believe in Romans 14, it's addressing food sacrificed to idols. But even if you want to take it for clean or unclean foods, again, the principle is the same. Each one of us should be following our own conscience, persuaded in our own mind, again, following our convictions, not just our personal preferences, but following our convictions. I read something a while back on page 257 of The Great Controversy that really spoke to me, because I think it's something that our people really need to hear. It's talking about the Reformation. And here on page 257 of The Great Controversy, it says, "In Wesley's time, as in all ages of the church's history, men of different gifts performed their appointed work. They did not harmonize upon every point of doctrine, but all were moved by the Spirit of God." And I want to emphasize this. They did not agree on every point of doctrine, but all were moved by the Holy Spirit. And I just want to bring that up because I've met so many people in the church that have had the attitude that if you have the Holy Spirit, you're going to think just like I do. because I have the Holy Spirit and this is how I think. So since I have the Holy Spirit and I think this way, if you have the Holy Spirit, you'll think the exact same way I do. That's not what Romans 14 says. And that's not what the Great Controversy says either. It is very possible for somebody to be led by the Holy Spirit and not think like me, even if I am led by the Holy Spirit. It says quite clearly there, in the same spirit of Romans 14, they did not agree on every point of doctrine, but all were led by the Holy Spirit. I want to share something else here on page 292 of the Great Controversy. I'm going to start on the last paragraph of 292, and it will continue over to page 293 of the Great Controversy. It was the desire for liberty of conscience that inspired the pilgrims to brave the perils of the long journey across the sea, to endure the hardships and dangers of the wilderness, and with God's blessing, to lay on the shores of America the foundation of a mighty nation. Listen to this. Yet honest and God-fearing as they were, the pilgrims did not comprehend the great principle of religious liberty. The freedom which they sacrificed so much to secure for themselves, they were not equally ready to grant to others. So in other words, that they left Europe because they didn't want to follow the Pope, and they got to America and they wanted to be the Pope. We can't do that. The same religious freedom that we want for ourselves, we have to grant to others. As a matter of fact, it goes on here on page 293 of Great Controversy and says the doctrine that God has committed to the church, the right to control the conscience and to define and punish heresy, is one of the most deeply rooted of papal errors. Let me say that again. Let me read this again. The doctrine that God has committed to the church, the right to control the conscience and to define and punish heresy, is one of the most deeply rooted of papal errors. Friends, let's celebrate religious liberty, and let's let others celebrate religious liberty as well. Let's grant to others the same freedom to follow their conscience that we exercise in following our own conscience. Again, religious liberty only for people who think just like me is not religious liberty. God knows that. That's why he inspired Paul to write in Romans 14, verse 5, let each one be persuaded, convinced, convicted in their own mind, as we all celebrate and practice religious liberty and the freedom to follow our own conscience together. God bless you. Happy Sabbath. And to my American friends, happy 4th of July, Independence Day. God bless.